Hi, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and despite saying that I wanted to refocus on Mega Man this year, after doing a review of Super Mario Land for Game Boy, I did get a handful of comments telling me to look at the sequel. So I will. When it came to the original Mario Land, I thought it was pretty unique, having locales and enemies not really seen in the rest of the franchise, though I definitely felt the hardware limitations. Still enjoyed it though, and the sequel came out 3 years later, so maybe the developers had a better handle on the system by then. So, let's see if Super Mario Land The 6 Golden Coins is a step up, or just more of the same. It seems that Mario has his own island, known as Mario Land, and while he was out helping Princess Daisy, Wario snuck in and took over his castle. Never knew Mario was such a big shot, thought marrying into royalty was going to be his ticket to the high life. Anyway, 6 golden coins are scattered throughout the land that serve as keys to his occupied castle. A simple premise, but I'm kinda surprised that Mario's a land-owning ruler. Seems like the sort of thing that would get brought up more. And this is also the debut of Wario. I don't think I need to tell you how significant that is. Dude is not only one of Mario's main rivals and kind of a doppelganger, but he's gotten multiple spin-off series. Wario Land, which usurps this one, and WarioWare. Big fan of both. There's a part of me that wonders if he was supposed to be a throwaway villain like Tatanga, but maybe his popularity kept him around, though regardless, Wario's introduction does make this a pretty significant entry. Mario can run, jump, and crouch, the second being able to take out most enemies and are also a bit floaty. I'd also say that Mario's feet are a little less slippery in this one, so how he controls is really going to depend on your preferences. And of course he's got power-ups. Mushrooms make him big, fire flowers let him huck fireballs, but rather than a palette swap, which would be kinda hard to do on the original Game Boy or Pocket, he gets a feather in his cap. Carrots give him rabbit ears, which he can flap if you hold the jump button to allow him to slowly descend, giving him a lot of horizontal movement. If you get hit while wearing a special cap, you'll turn back into Big Mario, then into Tiny if it happens again, so at full, 3 hits take you out. Big Mario and Fire Mario can also spin by hitting down, which can break some blocks, and some also get wrecked by fireballs, so be aware of your capabilities to avoid destroying your footholds. Also, I swear I once got a mushroom when I had a power and that took me back to just merely big, so watch out for that too. Other pickups are the Superstars, which turn you invincible and can grant some extra lives with enough of a kill combo, Hearts, which are extra lives because again, different colors wouldn't work, and Money Bags, which contain 50 coins. Speaking of, 100 no longer nets you an extra life. Instead, you need to spend them on a roulette, which can grant a different number of cash, lives, or Jack Diddley. The more you drop at once, the bigger the prizes, though you can still lose it all, even at the maximum. I'm not the biggest fan of this since you have to walk across the world map to use them, need to pay attention to make sure you're not stuck at the max and wasting them, and I'd rather just have the set rewards as opposed to needing to gamble, but given that this is on NSO now, you could really abuse this system with Rewind. In a similar vein, at the end of each level is an exit, which you can simply walk through, or if you ring the bell above it, you'll get a mini-game. There's 2 you can get, either a claw machine or a ladder lottery with interfering mice that can reward you with power-ups or lives. Also worth noting is that each stage has a smaller bell halfway through that will serve as a checkpoint if you ring it, and the overall goal is to collect the 6 golden coins, which you get from bosses. If you game over, you'll have to replay the last stage in each completed zone, but while that does set you back, it's not nearly as harsh as having to redo the whole game from the start screen. As for the stages themselves, there's 6 zones with a few levels each, and you can complete these zones in any order. Even beyond that flexibility, there's also a starting stage, some bonus levels you can find, a few secret exits, and even some stages that can be skipped, so you really have a lot of freedom with how you tackle your adventure. And as a Mega Man fan, I mean, how do you think I feel about that? Very enthusiastic. There's also a lot of variety with the sort of areas you'll come across. There's a tree with oversized insects, a space zone, a giant-sized house, a spooky area, one where you go inside a Mario wind-up toy, and an aquatic zone. Honestly, with how the box looks and how often he seems to get shrunk down, is Mario Land maybe inside a magical snow globe? Anyway, the novelty doesn't stop there. Each individual stage is pretty unique. Just to get to the space zone, you need to get through a special level where you float through the air in a bubble, then you get a stage with low gravity, then you Flappy Bird your way through the night sky, and the water area has your basic island hopping swimming stage, followed by a partially flooded submarine, and the inside of a whale where you have to swim through the juices hanging from the walls of its stomach. Even in the worlds with less wild variations, there still tends to be a lot of unique enemies, obstacles, and environments. Some of the most I've seen in a 2D Mario. Whereas normally, I'd expect a lot of copy-pasting, even simple stuff like flooring gets changed up, like how you go from gears to Legos in the toy zone. They could have gotten away with a lot less. As for my personal favorites, I really enjoy the Mario and Pumpkin zones for the whimsy and spookiness. When it comes to all those enemies, of course you still have some Goombas, Koopas, Boos, and a few others for the usual suspects, but there's even more baddies unique to this game. And granted, a few of these serve similar roles, like the enemies with the diving helmets and Jason masks are pretty much just Goombas with different headgear, but you also get a bunch of bugs, spaceships, toys, pigs that fire cannonballs from their snouts, and several yokai. There's even a vampire that fires off bats that only shows up once in the entire series. While the regular Mario enemies appear here and there, most of the others only show up in a specific world, which really solidifies the theme and feel of each. They really went above and beyond for the roster in this one. I personally really love the yokai since, like the Zhangxi and Sphinx last game, it brings in some real world mythology, which is really fun to see. Then of course we have the bosses. All of them take 3 hits to dispatch, with the bird and witch being probably the easiest to take out, you just needing to hop on their heads when they either swoop or appear, and the octopus isn't too bad either. Sure, he'll send other enemies your way, but given that you can just swim over him and attack again as soon as his iframes drop, you can make quick work of him. The mouse can be a little tricky, since you need to watch out for not just what pipe it comes out and which way it's moving, but also because unless you have a fire flower, you need to carefully short hop to avoid jumping over it completely. And Tatanga is back, firing a straight shot and one that flies low, then goes up as soon as it passes you to explode. He can actually be kind of hard since you not only have to dodge 2 projectiles while swimming through space, but the game can be somewhat finicky with what it counts as a valid hit. I swear there's been times where I've sat my butt on that guy's head and I've been the one who gets hurt. Then you have the 3 little pigs who roll, hop, and floaty jump around, one after another. And remember how I said every boss takes 3 hits? Well, since there's 3 of them, that means 9, with them getting faster after every hit, and the last one's movements are a little tricky to intercept. And then of course you get the final boss, Wario, who has 3 forms, so another 9 hits. First, he runs around and slams the floor to drop a light fixture, then he puts on the rabbit hat to float and do the same, and finally, he gets a fire flower, so you need to dodge projectiles. He's not too hard though, even with those 9 hits, so you don't have to worry about the fight being too drawn out. So yeah, the bosses aren't bad either. While I would have expected some wilder and crazier ones based off of the regular enemies, they're still fun enough, and I also think it's cool that they reused Tatanga and adjusted him to fit this game, even if he is a bit of a pain. I also like how Wario's able to use your own power-ups against you, making him pretty much just a bigger doppelganger. I think the visuals look pretty good for Game Boy. They're a huge step up from the original game, which were kind of ugly, so they either got better with the hardware, or found a way to fit more onto the cartridge. And speaking of, it's worth bringing up again how much variety is here. I don't think I can say much more beyond what I already did. Not a lot gets reused from stage to stage, you're constantly getting new environments and areas, typically within the same zone. I still have no idea how or why they managed it, but I can really appreciate the effort. In addition to that, most things are communicated pretty well. No wondering what's background, foreground, a platform, a block, an enemy. Oh, and of course you can go green, gray, or color, and if you do the third option, it does seem to have more color variety than some other Game Boy titles. Mega Man, you typically have a color for each layer, but here, you can get a few for every layer, and a lot of them feel appropriate for what they're meant to represent. I feel a little silly praising a game that's so limited by hardware restraints, but at the same time, it really does feel like they managed to get the most out of what they were working with, and I can't help but be impressed. The music, I'm a little more meh on. On the whole, it's fine. It sets the mood, using cute little beep boops, and none of the tracks really offend me, but it's also not really the sort of OST that sticks in my mind. But that tends to be Mario until we get to Galaxy in general. Will say that I really like the Star Maze track, which manages to put a smile on my face, but the rest of them, I'm pretty tepid on, which I'm sure will be blasphemy to some. I'm kind of impressed with the difficulty. With one major caveat. Surprisingly, I'd say that all the zones are around the same challenge. While you might want to bounce around a little bit if you're having trouble with a particular world, I'd imagine most people are either going to go immediately right or left after the starting zone, and make their way around the island clockwise or counterclockwise. And maybe because I speak English, I expect most to go left first. And with that also being the tree area, which is probably the most basic, I'd almost kinda say that's what the developers thought too, to start you out slow. But no, I've tackled the game in both directions, and I had about as much trouble with each zone. While all the places you could fall in the tree gave me issues, as well as the space physics, which is in the second zone to the left, I could see someone else having just as much trouble with swimming in the submarine maze, or the Pumpkin Zone's tricks, which are on the right. So I'd say they did a good job balancing the game around the whole any order thing so that a first time player wouldn't screw themselves if they happened to take a wrong turn. As for how challenging the game is overall, I'd say that I played harder games, but I'd also play easier. There's a few things to contend with, like the floaty jumps might mess with some people, especially when you need to land on something pretty precisely, and not getting extra lives consistently from coins could be an issue for anyone who has terrible luck with the slots. Another oddity are the hitboxes, which can be hard to read. Already mentioned the fickle nature of Tatangas, but even outside of that, there's a lot of times when I'm left squinting at the game, trying to figure out why something happened the way it did, though I will say that this cuts both ways. Sometimes, I'll swear I jumped on something, only for it to turn out that, no, I guess I was just a little short and hit the front instead. Other times, I'm convinced I messed up, but the game will just magnanimously give me a pass. Sure, it's inconsistent and can make the game a little harder to get down, but at the same time, when it seems like it's doing you a favor just as often as it's screwing you over, it's hard to get too mad. I also imagine the hitbox thing would be harder to notice on a smaller screen, whereas it sticks out a lot more on a TV. I think screen size would make things harder on the whole, but hey, if you're playing this on Switch or emulator, I'd say it's medium difficulty, leaning more towards easy, or at least I would if it weren't for one thing, the final stage. It's several hallways, climbing up a tower filled with traps, moving platforms, tricky jumps, and some ricocheting enemies near the top. Several of the traps are hard to see off screen, there's a ton of pits, i.e. insta-kills, and I don't think there's any real indication of the tile switches that set off the hard to slide under mashers the first time you reach them. Plus, there's no checkpoints. It feels like an endurance test of cheap deaths, and I kinda hate it. On the plus side though, I swear the floors get easier the further up you climb, so while the first set of obstacles is brutal, later traps are less frustrating, and Wario, despite being the final boss, is kind of a pushover. The further you get, the less likely you'll have to repeat the abuse previously suffered. Part of the issue here might be the removal of standard progression. Making each area about as hard as a starting or mid-game level means that when you ratchet something up to endgame, it's a huge spike. Even Mega Man has several fortress levels so that they don't need to hit you with the difficulty all at once. Even then though, this last stage can feel so unfair that I could see it crapping the bed for a lot of people, ruining an otherwise pretty fun, chill game. I know it did the first time I played through, really abused that rewind, though I'll also say that once I learned where everything was, I did manage to get through it legit. But let's get back on that positive train. Other than that little hiccup at the end, I do find Super Mario Land 2 6 Golden Coins to be a delightful game. Mario titles have a certain formula they typically follow. Bowser does bad thing, you fight variations of his minions, there's different theme levels in set order, unless you get weird with warp zones, and so on. So one that bucks the trend this much is a real treat. Not only that, but given how limited Game Boy cartridges are, I'm really impressed with how much they fit in, even going so far as to put in assets they wouldn't get much use out of. Plus, they even created one of the most iconic Mario, and by extension, video game characters, starting him out as just some malformed Mario copycat, but eventually really coming into his own, soon after in fact. Part of the reason this game was able to get away with so many deviations might have been because it was early enough that the rules weren't really established yet, but it still feeling so different might have been why after this, Mario Land morphed into Wario Land, with the special hats for powers sticking around for the next entry, and the odder cast of characters fitting the odder protagonist. Not to mention the different moveset and use of coins. But hey, I should probably stick with the game I'm reviewing for now, though I think we're about ready to wrap up on that. So let me ask you, how do you feel about this game? Is it an oddball favorite or a deviant mistake? Would you have liked to see them continue the series, or was passing the baton to Wario and letting Mario focus on home console the right move? And while this game is pretty sizable for the Game Boy, is it big enough for a remake? With that, thanks as always for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you're into retro games, especially platformers. Yeah! Wah! Wahoo!